South America still holds the kind of blank spaces that do not come from poor mapping, but from places people quietly avoid. These are forests that swallow sound, rivers that decide what they will return, and plains where a whistle seems to travel in ways no wind can explain. Tonight, we cross those stretches: the flooded veins of the Amazon, the high reeds of Patagonia, mangrove mazes on the Pacific coast, and the llanos, where horizons give you nowhere to hide. We will follow 10 encounters and the lessons wrapped inside them. One pattern keeps repeating. Sometimes the warning arrives before the disaster, and sometimes the warning is the disaster. We begin where the jungle teaches you to smell danger before you see it. In indigenous accounts across the western Amazon, the Mapinguari is not just an animal, it is a guardian that can punish arrogance. People describe something towering and shaggy, with skin like bark, a single glaring eye, and, if you believe the oldest tellings, a second mouth across its belly that never seems to close. Rubber tappers in the 20th century told versions with the same structure. First, the jungle goes quiet, then a smell like sweet rot arrives, and finally the undergrowth opens in a way that looks less like movement and more like a wall, deciding to step forward. Reports from Acre and Madre de Dios describe trees forced apart as if by a walking battering ram, and palm trunks split cleanly down their cores. One tapper recalled, "The wind came from the wrong direction and brought the stink with it. I fired once and the air felt like it stopped moving." These stories are not sermons about monsters, they are instructions for survival. In a forest that erases tracks by noon, a path that remains visible into the afternoon is not an invitation, it is a warning. The Minhocao is the great worm, a colossal burrower blamed for trenches that appear overnight and fields that sag like carpets over something breathing underneath. 19th century clippings talk about fences swallowed in straight lines and creek banks collapsing with no rain to blame. Farmers did what farmers do. They measured the damage and tried to predict the next place it would surface. Witnesses in Rio Pardo and surrounding regions reported steaming furrows at dawn and soil that seemed to pulse in long, slow waves, as if something armored were passing just below the surface. One account put it simply: the ground moved like a chest taking a breath. This is a monster made of absence, no footprints, no eyeshine, only the land briefly behaving like a body. River guides use the name Yacumama, Mother of the Waters, for a serpentine force that does not simply live in the river, but behaves like part of it. The pattern is as old as travel on Blackwater. The bend is glass calm, the canoe sits level, and then the surface hunches as if a sleeping hill rolls over. Witnesses near Iquitos and along the Marañón reported canoes lifting at the bow without visible cause, wakes that pass beneath with a whistling rush, and a missing sternman with no splash and no struggle. One guide remembered, there was a shadow longer than the canoe. The water made a sound like someone exhaling under us, and then he was gone. On slow water, speed is the piece you never see, only the consequence. In Mapuche and Chilote tradition, the pochin is a flying serpent that paralyzes with a hiss and drinks without a mess. The cruelty of the stories lies in their tidiness, livestock found arranged as if set down gently, with nothing on the ground to explain what happened. Reports from the Chiloé archipelago in the mid-20th century mention sheep drained in neat circles and households where someone woke unable to move while leathery wings brushed rafters overhead. A farmer put it this way: the lambs were clean, the dew was untouched, and something had breathed on my chest while I could not lift a finger. The fear is not about blood, it is about the precision. El Cuero, literally the hide, is said to float like discarded leather until a barbed mouth turns the sheet into a trap. Lake stories are easy to dismiss until the behavior feels like strategy. Fishermen on southern Chilean lakes told of pale, hide-like shapes that lay perfectly still until touched with an oar, and then gripped the wood hard enough to leave a single gouged groove. One man explained, "It didn't splash. It held my oar and pulled." In water that looks like a mirror, the first sign of danger is often that nothing disturbs the reflection until your hands already hurt. Latunda is remembered on the Pacific coast as a shapeshifter that borrows familiar faces to lure people into mangrove mazes. The detail that repeats is not the creature, it is the labyrinth. Paths loop back on themselves, landmarks look deliberate, and a person who ate and drank hours earlier suddenly cannot say what they swallowed. Families in Esmeraldas and Colombia's coastal towns have accounts of missing children found days later with mud packed under their nails and a steadiness that looks like a trance. One boy, once safe, said simply, "She cooked for me. She looked like my mother." These are not cinematic chases. They are slow kidnappings conducted by geography and patience. El Mohan is the river's unruly landlord, hairy, clever, and territorial. He is blamed for tangled lines, nets returned braided, bait stolen with a smoker's grin, and bathers pulled where the current looks harmless. The lesson, repeated in 100 river towns, is that dusk is not for swimming, and honestly, jokes about the current are not as funny as they sound. Fishermen along the Magdalena reported nets twisted so tightly they could stand upright, tobacco gone from pockets, and hair found combed into knots around anchor stones. A boatman told it like this: "The river gave my hook back, but it braided the line first, and someone's hand was under the water when it happened." Whether you believe in a troll or not, the rules are clear. You respect a river by staying in your boat. So, the story of the Cayman Man began as a morality tale about a voyeur cursed by his own behavior, but it persists because the river still offers shapes that look like decisions coming back. The sightings, cluster around quiet eddies, reeds that part without wind, and eyes at the exact height of your reflection. Witnesses around Plato describe a broad reptilian head with an unnervingly human brow line, surfacing without ripples and sinking the same way. Night fishers added details: a shadow that follows a dugout just under the skin of the water, and a hand that looks too human, resting on the rim before it slides away. One man said, "It surfaced to the dock and blinked like it understood me." The threat in these stories is not speed, but intention. The Whistler of the Llanos is less a beast than a consequence. The tale punishes cruelty and drunkenness with a figure so thin the wind might move through it, carrying a sack of bones and a whistle that plays tricks with distance. If it sounds near, you are safe. If it sounds far, he is behind you. Ranchers across Apure and Barinas have accounts of dogs that refuse to bark, of men found in the morning with injuries no hoof or boot could explain, and of a whistle that stays exactly wrong for hours. One tale ends with a line nobody argues with: "We heard him for days like he was across the field, but the horses stared at the empty road behind us." These are plains where a straight horizon gives you nothing to blame but what you already heard. The Southern Cone's werewolf tradition is not merely a campfire story. It spilled into policy when governments began godfathering seventh sons to calm families who feared the curse. Rural accounts describe livestock torn without bear prints, doors bowed inward without tool marks, and tracks that begin as human and finish as paw. Witnesses in Misiones and Corrientes recounted nights of pacing outside, a smell like wet fur at the threshold, and prints that walked upright to the gate and then dropped to all fours beyond it. One farmer remembered, by day he was feverish and polite. By night, the yard felt watched. In the morning, there were two kinds of tracks, both his size. Whether you call it a curse or a culprit, the bite marks do not care about vocabulary. Across these 10 accounts, the details change, but the rhythm remains constant. People describe a smell that arrives before footsteps, a river that lifts a boat without a wave, a roof that remembers weight without showing how it was placed there, a path that loops back on itself because the place wants you to stay. Whether you prefer to see guardians, predators, curses, or cautionary tales with teeth, the practical lesson is the same. When a place feels wrong, that feeling is not decoration. It is information you can use. The safest decision is often the least dramatic one. Step back from the clearing that looks too clean. Keep paddling when the water takes a breath, and do not follow the voice that borrowed a face to call your name. If the night offers you a bargain, ask yourself a single question before you answer. Is the landscape giving you permission or asking for yours?